Good afternoon, friends, faculty, faculty, and graduates. For many of us, the global poverty courses we have taken together have been our most intimate. In this room alone, I am surrounded by mentors and peers, among whom I have found not only meaningful inspiration, but also deep camaraderie. So it is truly an honor and a privilege to be here addressing you today. The Global Poverty in Practice minor is set up as a journey. And through our coursework, we begin what becomes a recursive practice of questioning and critiquing strategies of poverty alleviation, the ethics of global citizenship, and where we lie in that ourselves. What makes our minor the most unique is the component of our practice experience, the main requirement of which is time, a somehow simultaneously minuscule and yet inconceivably large 240 hours. For my practice experience, I focused on arts education and New Orleans. Looking back on it now, my practice experience was one of the most formative experiences of my time at Cal. Although upon returning to Berkeley, what feels like years ago, but was only last fall, it didn't feel formative. It felt incredibly unsettling, and I felt lost. Unsure if I had made the right decision by going in the first place, and equally uneasy about having to leave New Orleans and come back to school. We are taught to challenge within the minor the ethics of voluntourism, trips that surely benefit the tourist volunteers themselves more than the beneficiary hosts. In critiquing this increasingly common phenomenon of service trips, we have to ask ourselves if this is also what we are setting ourselves up for with our practice experiences, doing more harm than good. A number of times within my own global poverty journey, I have been required to read Yvonne Illich's "To Hell with Good Intentions." As a speech he gave to Peace Corps volunteers almost 60 years ago, Illich's words are as acerbic as ever. The damage which volunteers do willy-nilly is too high a price for the belated insight that they shouldn't have been volunteers in the first place. I am here to challenge you, he explained, to recognize your inability, your powerlessness, and your incapacity to do the good which you intended to do. As global poverty in practice minors, I believe that we have the best intentions. However, we have surely been keeping our fingers in our ears if we ever thought that our benign intentions would be enough. As we've all learned, the world does not begin the day that we set out to do good. We are predated by centuries of systemic exploitation which created the very poverty we so benevolently seek to eradicate. The courses we take in global poverty are meant to help us understand this history and our own positionality as we set out to do social justice-related work. Along this journey, I have had quite a few moments of self-doubt, many of which somehow coincided with articles such as Illich's. And in these dramatic moments, I found some distraction by mulling over a paradox Ananya Roy shared with us in 115. To find ourselves in the space between the hubris of benevolence and the paralysis of cynicism. I remember initially hearing Professor Roy say these words in lecture, and it felt like a prophecy that would define the rest of my time within the minor. I arrived at global poverty because I had such arrogant dreams of wanting to fight inequality and end poverty. I wanted personal fulfillment that I was indeed doing good work, while somehow contributing to global change. When Professor Roy's words set in for the first time, I felt like a mirror had been held up to my ambition. And I realized that this was my hubris, to think that with my good intentions, nothing I did could be conceived as anything other than altruism. And in my will to change, to become better, I began to fear a trajectory where I would learn more and more about a world that is filled with greed, cruelty, and despair, only to be left in a psychosomatic paralysis. I was no longer just afraid of doing more harm than good, but I was also afraid of becoming someone who would do nothing. As Shrey mentioned, ignorance is ethically indefensible, but so too is choosing inaction. Thinking that neutrality might not be a political decision in itself is an expression of complicity in systems of exclusion. Feeling pulled in different directions, motivated towards public service, but afraid of doing more harm than good, and terrified of doing nothing, I decided to let my curiosity get the better of me. Thus, I proceeded to plan my practice experience in New Orleans. Part of this planning was very much guided by the minor curriculum. Through thorough education and significant time commitment, we aim to set ourselves apart from the volunteers who are more visibly in it for themselves. The minor facilitates praxis, the combination of theory and practice. We believe this notion of sustained commitment allows us to build better relationships with the people we are working with, that this might substantiate our presence, such that we are not solely putting more work on the plates of the people that we are working with. And so while in New Orleans, I felt my own expectations to test myself, my knowledge, and my character, and have the depth and richness of the relationships I was building act as metric for my achievement. But when it came time to return to Berkeley, it all suddenly ended, and I felt ripped from the people I had been working with. Fortunately, as Shrey so beautifully laid out, we are taught a self-reflective praxis and experience this firsthand through our shared catharsis of the capstone course. I arrived on the first day of 196 not looking to be validated, but at the very least, searching for some resolution, justification for the work that we did. I believe that all of us who have taken this course, especially anyone in my class, can tell you about how Colin told us in an extravagant metaphor about climbing hills and mountains that there is no Mount Everest. There is no end to the work that we do. There is no closure or final affirmation that should ever go uncritiqued. In looking at the global poverty journey as an educational experience, I want to suggest that there is value to this feeling of being unsettled. As Claire quoted Paulo Freire in our methods course, those who authentically commit themselves to the people must re-examine themselves constantly. I think that this constant practice of critiquing, questioning, and challenging is exhausting, but the unsettled feeling is a discomfort that comes from learning. And it is necessary if we want to do good, or at the very least, learn from our mistakes. Yet despite this realization, my anxiety about both the hubris and potential to become paralyzed by cynicism lingered throughout my time in the capstone course. I was hanging on to the hope that I could outgrow my hubris without tumulting into such an opposite extreme. And on the very last day of this class, as I was still searching for my place along the spectrum of hubristic benevolence and paralyzing cynicism, like my liberal arts education taught me, I became critical of the dichotomy this analysis suggests. Even with the whole spectrum between these poles, they are not entirely mutually exclusive. I realized on this day, which signified somewhat of an arbitrary end to such a seminal experience, that another state, which I would become extremely anxious about, is the hubris of cynicism. As we learn to constantly critique ourselves, it becomes easy to lapse into cynicism. And as we develop an association of cynicism to intellect, we learn that in playing pessimist, we may seem smarter or more well-seasoned, an expert even. Cynicism acts as a shortcut, providing the guise of experience, that we've seen a lot, and it doesn't look good. I've learned that if I am cynical as I describe myself, I seem well-versed in criticism, somehow more keenly aware of myself and the world around me. But how conceited is that? To think that we could ever know so much, we may be above the people that we work with and learn from, that their efforts aren't enough, that our skepticism is superior to a tenacious perseverance of hope, makes me feel that cynicism is fundamentally twofold with a dangerous hubris. To me, conflating hope with naivete and cynicism with intellect demonstrates an arrogance that may need more than reflection to eradicate. As we hear, to hell with good intentions, we need to be able to feel that discomfort that we may be doing the wrong thing without using cynicism as a coping mechanism. As I share with you one of my newfound fears of cynicism, I want to also reassure you of my faith in us to overcome it. Our minor has given us the space to explore ourselves and given us theory to understand the space that we occupy. And while our practice experiences were the climax of our journey, the core of our minor is the community. We go through the different stages of this minor together. We are reflecting together. We are asking deeply personal and difficult questions together. At such a large university, support we see from the GPP staff is unparalleled. Jane is the most organized, kind, and patient advisor on this campus. I've even had the support from Sean and Cecilia, neither of whom did I ever actually take a class with. I would be thoughtless to exclude the plethora of welcome gatherings, thoughtful orientations, weekly emails that we are privileged with, and that incredibly important post-practice retreat. Thanks to the GPP faculty and staff, the necessary community for this minor really extends outside of the classroom. And now we're graduating, which is scary in and of itself, but we take away with us our ability to understand complexity. My mom is an elementary school teacher, and when she takes her class outside to play softball, she doesn't keep score. She tells them that they are just out there to exercise. She has worked with children longer than anyone I know. Her expertise comes from her lived experience. And it is so visible when I go to her school to see how loved she is by her students, their families, and her colleagues. My mother has been my main teacher my whole life. The classroom that she cultivates is a space free from failure, which I think is especially important for her second graders so that they can learn to keep trying without some fear of some ultimate failure. And in my understanding of complexity, education is a point of stability where our failures are cushioned. So as we depart from that, we need to work on cultivating within ourselves an acceptance of failure, and also metrics of success where we do not find validation within the failures of others. We need to be able to dish out criticism as well as take it. We need to be understanding of unease and comfortable with failure. We need to recognize that these are challenges that we need to work with, learn from, and find motivation to try again. Now we occupy a space of educatedness, able to understand that problems are more complex than meets the eye, narratives are shrouded with hegemony, and that we must challenge the notion of expertise while also doing justice to our educations, that we are on some level experts ourselves. We are brave and we are curious, we are arrogant and we are fearful. But I am confident that our educations from this campus and from our own lived experiences have taught us both the strength and humility to push back against injustice, as well as receive the personal criticisms we will undoubtedly encounter. To do nothing is to accept the world as it is. To challenge and critique our world is ultimately an expression of hope. That while we might never reach utopia, we can still work for a better tomorrow. And at the very least, I hope that we have learned that we are not alone. It has been an honor and a privilege learning from and with all of you. Thank you and congratulations.